If she were truly happy with someone new, your silence would mean nothing to her. Real happiness doesn't linger, doesn't check the past, doesn't feel unsettled by what no longer exists. When someone is genuinely fulfilled, they are present, they are grounded, they are not disturbed by absence. So if your silence bothers her, if it creates discomfort, curiosity, or emotional tension, it's not because you're doing something wrong, it's because something inside her remains unresolved. Think about it. Happiness doesn't need reassurance. It doesn't need comparisons. It doesn't replay old conversations or wonder why someone stopped caring. When someone has moved on completely, they don't feel the weight of what's no longer there. They don't notice the quiet. They don't search for meaning in it. Silence only becomes loud when there is something left to hear. Your silence doesn't scream desperation. It doesn't demand attention, doesn't try to prove anything. And that's exactly why it carries so much weight. Words can be ignored, explained away, or twisted to fit a narrative. Silence can't. Silence has no agenda, no justification, no emotional chaos attached to it. It's simply existence. And in that existence, it exposes what words can't hide. If she's happy, but still affected by your absence, it's because happiness built on distraction is fragile. It's easy to smile when there's noise, attention, and validation around you. It's easy to appear moved on when something new fills the space. But when the noise stops, when you stop reaching out, stop reacting, stop showing that you still care, the emotional truth has nowhere to run. That's when silence becomes unbearable. Your silence forces a comparison she didn't plan for. Not between you and the new person, but between who she was with you and who she is now. Because silence removes the comfort of familiarity. It removes the option to keep you emotionally available in the background. And when that option disappears, the mind starts asking questions the heart hasn't answered yet. If she were truly at peace, your quiet wouldn't feel heavy. It wouldn't trigger curiosity. It wouldn't create the urge to check, ask, or indirectly seek validation that you're still affected. Peace doesn't reach backward. It moves forward without resistance. So when your silence disrupts her, it's not because she misses you in a simple way, it's because she hasn't fully closed that chapter. And here's the part most people don't understand: silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't remind, it doesn't blame. It simply reflects. It reflects emotional gaps, unfinished feelings, and the reality that not everything was replaced, no matter how convincing the outside story looks. Your silence becomes louder than any explanation because it carries self-respect. It says, I don't need to be seen to exist. I don't need to be heard to be valuable. And that energy is unsettling to someone who expected you to stay accessible, expressive, or emotionally available long after the connection ended. So don't mistake her reaction for strength. Don't assume her visible happiness equals inner clarity. Often the loudest smiles are the ones most disturbed by quiet. And your silence, it doesn't chase the truth, it reveals it. Sometimes, the strongest message you'll ever send is saying nothing at all. When you stop speaking, stop explaining, stop trying to be understood, something powerful happens. The noise disappears, and in that quiet, she is left alone with herself. Silence removes the distraction that words create. No arguments to win, no emotions to analyze, no reactions to measure, just space. And space is uncomfortable for anyone who hasn't fully made peace with their choices. As long as you were talking, reacting, or expressing how you felt, the focus stayed on you, on your emotions, on your responses, on what you might do next. But the moment you went silent, the spotlight shifted, not toward the new relationship, not toward the future, but inward. And that's where silence does its real work. Silence forces reflection. It doesn't allow avoidance. When there's no message to read, no call to ignore, no emotion to manage, the mind begins filling the gaps. Questions arise naturally. Why doesn't he care anymore? Why isn't he reacting like I expected? Why does this quiet feel heavier than his words ever did? These questions aren't about you reaching out. They're about her looking inward. People often think silence is passive, but it's the opposite. It's active in the way it removes emotional crutches. When someone can no longer rely on your attention or your validation, they are forced to confront what they truly feel. And if everything were resolved, If every emotion had been processed and accepted, silence would feel like relief. But when something remains unresolved, silence feels like pressure. Your absence becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. They don't soften the truth. They don't distract from it. They simply reflect what's already there: doubt, comparison, emotional residue, the unspoken realization that moving on physically doesn't always mean moving on emotionally. Silence also removes the ability to control the narrative. When you were communicating, she could interpret your words, respond strategically, or frame the situation in a way that protected her emotional comfort. But silence gives no material to reshape, no tone to analyze, no sentence to misinterpret, just stillness. And in that stillness, the mind has to sit with honesty. This is why silence often feels heavier than closure. Closure feels final. Silence feels open-ended. It creates a psychological pause where emotions surface without direction. And for someone who believed they had everything figured out, that pause is unsettling. Your silence doesn't accuse her of anything. It doesn't demand answers or explanations. Yet somehow it feels like accountability. Not because you asked for it, but because silence removes the option to distract from it. She is no longer reacting to you. She is reacting to herself. And here's the truth that makes silence so powerful. It doesn't try to change her feelings. It simply allows them to exist. And emotions that are allowed to exist don't disappear. They reveal themselves. You didn't need to confront her. You didn't need to remind her of what you shared. You didn't need to question her choices. Your silence did all of that without saying a word. It gave her the space to feel what she avoided feeling when everything was loud. So if your silence makes her uncomfortable, restless, or curious, understand this. It's not because she needs your voice. It's because silence took away her escape. And sometimes the most honest conversation happens when no one speaks. Control often hides behind comfort. As long as you were present, responsive, and emotionally available, there was a sense of predictability. She knew how to reach you, how you would react, how much access she still had to your attention. Even after moving on, that access can remain subtle, unspoken, but real. And when that access exists, there is comfort in knowing that you are still there, still affected, still within reach. Your silence disrupts that completely. When you stop responding, stop explaining, stop offering emotional availability, something shifts beneath the surface. The familiar dynamic breaks. The expectation that you will always be reachable disappears. And with it goes the quiet sense of control that once existed. Not control in a manipulative sense, but in a psychological one, the reassurance that you are still emotionally connected, still part of the equation. People often assume moving on means letting go of influence. That's not always true. Sometimes influence remains because one person continues to care openly, while the other moves forward knowing they can still pull emotional strings. Your reactions, your messages, your presence become proof that the connection still holds power. Silence removes that proof. When you go quiet, she no longer knows where she stands with you. She no longer knows what you feel, how you think, or whether you are still emotionally invested. And uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for someone who is used to certainty. It's not that she wants you back, it's that she expected the dynamic to remain familiar, expected you to stay affected, expected your emotions to be predictable. Your silence says something without saying anything at all. It says, I am no longer available in the way you assumed. And that realization hits harder than rejection ever could. Rejection still offers clarity, silence offers none. And when clarity disappears, control disappears with it. This is why silence is often mistaken for a strategy. But it's not a tactic, it's a boundary. You didn't remove yourself to punish her. You removed yourself to reclaim yourself. And that act alone rewrites the emotional balance. Once control is gone, the mind starts searching for it. She may replay old interactions, analyze past moments, or question her assumptions. Not because she regrets her choice, but because she didn't expect you to step out of the role you once played so consistently. Silence changes how you are perceived. When you were always available, your presence was familiar. When you become unavailable, your presence becomes significant. Scarcity changes value, not because you are rare, but because you are no longer accessible by default. And here's the deeper truth: your silence forces respect, not through fear, not through confrontation, but through self-possession. You are no longer reacting to her decisions. You are no longer seeking validation. You are no longer adjusting yourself to remain connected. You chose dignity over engagement. That choice unsettles anyone who expected emotional access without responsibility. She may tell herself she's fine. She may appear confident in her new situation. But control doesn't disappear quietly, it leaves a vacuum. And that vacuum is felt. Because for the first time, she is not guiding the emotional direction between you. She is not anticipating your response. She is not managing your presence. You're simply gone. And in that absence, a new reality forms, one where you are no longer influenced by her choices, and she no longer influences yours. Sometimes, the most powerful shift happens the moment you stop participating. Power in emotional connections is rarely about who speaks the loudest or who explains themselves best. It's about who needs less. For a long time, the dynamic may have been shaped by effort, your effort to understand, to communicate, to fix, to hold on. Words were your way of staying connected, of keeping the bond alive, of showing depth and sincerity. But the moment you stopped speaking, something fundamental changed. Silence doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't seek approval. It doesn't negotiate its worth. And that's why it shifts the power dynamic completely. When you were using words, you were still participating in a shared emotional space. Even disagreement kept the connection alive. Even explanation created engagement. But silence removes you from that space. It's not rejection and it's not withdrawal, it's independence. And independence changes how you are perceived. Words often come from a place of wanting to be understood. Silence comes from knowing you don't need to be. When you stop proving yourself, you stop chasing clarity from someone who may no longer deserve access to your inner world. And that shift, from explanation to self-possession, is deeply felt. Silence creates mystery where familiarity once lived. She knew your thoughts. She knew your emotions. She knew how deeply you felt. But now she doesn't. And that uncertainty elevates your presence without you doing anything at all. Not because you became distant, but because you became grounded. Respect doesn't come from availability. It comes from boundaries. And silence is a boundary that doesn't require defense. You didn't say, "I'm done." You didn't announce your exit. You simply stopped offering what was no longer reciprocated. That quiet withdrawal speaks volumes. The power dynamic changes because she is no longer reacting to you. You are no longer reacting to her. That symmetry breaks. And in its place, a new balance forms. One where you are not emotionally dependent on outcomes, responses, or validation. This is often when people start questioning their decisions. Not because they want to reverse them, but because the emotional script they expected didn't play out. They expected longing, explanation, emotion. They expected proof that they mattered. Silence denies that expectation without cruelty. Silence also removes competition. You are no longer trying to be better, louder, or more convincing than someone new. You're not comparing yourself. You're not defending your value. You're sick of silence. The moment you stop seeking leverage, you naturally rise above the emotional push and pull. This doesn't mean silence manipulates. It means silence clarifies. It clarifies who you are without attachment to outcome. It clarifies your self-respect. It clarifies that your value exists independently of her recognition. And when that realization sets in, the entire dynamic shifts, not in your favor or hers, but in truth's favor. Sometimes, the strongest position you can take is standing quietly in your own worth. When you step into silence, you stop being part of a comparison you never agreed to. You are no longer trying to measure up, explain yourself, or prove what you brought into her life. And yet, that's exactly when comparison begins, on her side, not yours. Not consciously at first, not deliberately, but naturally. Because absence has a way of highlighting what presence once meant. When you were there, your value was experienced daily. Familiar moments blended together. Effort became expected. But silence removes familiarity. And once familiarity is gone, memory takes over. Memory doesn't replay everything, it filters. It keeps what mattered. It keeps what felt real. And that's where comparison begins. She may not sit down and intentionally measure one person against another, but emotional depth is not easily replaced. Energy is not interchangeable. Connection leaves an imprint. And when someone new doesn't replicate the way you listened, the way you understood without explanation, the way you held space without needing to be asked, your absence becomes noticeable. Silence doesn't compete with the new presence. It creates contrast, and contrast reveals standards. You are not just someone who was there, you are someone who walked away with dignity. That alone changes how you are remembered. You didn't linger, beg, or demand relevance. You exited quietly, and that quiet exit becomes part of your identity. It signals strength, maturity, and self-respect. And those qualities don't fade easily in comparison. When things feel light and exciting, comparison stays dormant. Newness has its own momentum. But when routine settles in, when challenges appear, when emotional depth is required, that's when the mind reaches for reference points. And silence ensures that the reference point is not your words, not your reactions, but your presence as it once was. She may notice differences she didn't expect to matter. The way conversations feel shorter. The way understanding feels less intuitive. The way connection requires more explanation. These aren't flaws in the new person, they're reminders of what existed before. And reminders are powerful when they arise without being triggered. Your silence prevents nostalgia from being diluted. You didn't argue your case. You didn't remind her of your value. You allowed her to feel it in its absence. And that absence speaks in moments when comparison is unavoidable, not dramatic moments, but quiet ones. Moments of stillness. Moments of reflection. Silence also protects your image. You are not remembered as emotional, reactive, or stuck. You are remembered as composed. And composure ages well. Over time, it becomes more attractive, not less, because it suggests growth, not attachment. You are no longer competing with what's in front of her, you are standing behind her decisions, unshaken, unmoved. And that position carries weight, not because you are unreachable, but because you chose to be unavailable to something that no longer aligned with your worth. When someone new fails to match the depth of what once felt natural, the absence of your voice becomes louder than any attempt you could have made to remind her. Silence lets her discover the difference on her own, and discoveries made alone are the hardest to dismiss. You didn't set out to be compared. You simply set a standard by walking away, and sometimes the most unforgettable presence is the one that leaves quietly and never looks back. Silence is often misunderstood as coldness, avoidance, or even punishment. But real silence, the kind that comes from self-respect, is none of those things. It is not an attempt to hurt, to provoke, or to make someone miss you. It is a decision to stop bleeding emotionally in places that no longer heal you. And that distinction changes everything. When you go silent for growth, not revenge, the energy behind it is different. There's no bitterness in it, no hidden agenda, no expectation of reaction. You're not watching for signs, not counting days, not hoping for regret. You're choosing peace. And peace doesn't announce itself, it settles in quietly. Revenge still ties you emotionally to the outcome. It still gives the other person power over your inner state. Growth removes that power completely. Silence becomes a boundary, not a weapon. It protects your mind, your focus, your dignity. And once you experience that kind of internal quiet, you realize how much noise you were living with before. Silence allows you to redirect your energy inward. Instead of rehearsing conversations that will never happen or waiting for closure that may never come, you begin rebuilding yourself. You start noticing your own needs again, your own direction, your own worth outside of someone else's validation. This is where real strength forms. Not in proving you were right, not in being understood, but in accepting that some chapters don't need explanations to end. They just need distance. Growth also changes how you remember the past. When you stop engaging, emotions slowly lose their grip. What once felt overwhelming becomes clearer. You don't erase memories, you gain perspective. And perspective brings acceptance. Silence gives you time to grieve without being pulled back into emotional chaos. It lets wounds close without being reopened by mixed signals or false hope. And as healing progresses, Something unexpected happens. You stop needing answers. You stop needing apologies. You stop needing validation. That's when you realize you've already won. Not because she regrets anything. Not because she reaches out. Not because the past changes. But because you no longer need it to. Growth shifts your focus from who walked away to who you're becoming, from what was lost to what's being built. Silence creates space for that transformation, and transformation doesn't need an audience. If she feels your absence, that's her experience to process. If she doesn't, that doesn't invalidate your growth. Silence isn't measured by reaction, it's measured by relief. The relief of no longer performing emotionally. The relief of choosing yourself without guilt. You didn't go quiet to make her feel something. You went quiet to finally feel like yourself again. And in the end, that's the real victory, not being missed, but being free.